Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and I cannot tell you how excited I am for today's video. I was able to snag this new release as soon as it hit shelves. It just arrived 2 days ago, and I've spent a little bit of time with it, but I wanted to get this video out as soon as I possibly could. So today, we are taking a look at the brand new Stagg Jr. Batch 15. Alright, so sometime towards the end of last week, some pictures started popping up on different Facebook bourbon groups suggesting that there may have been a new release of Stagg Jr. Some people didn't believe this, some people immediately wanted to know how to get this, and others even suggested that these photos were photoshopped, but this proof, 65.55%, had never been seen before on a previous Stagg Jr. batch, and so nobody really knew what was going on. Lo and behold, a Facebook Messenger screenshot appeared where somebody actually asked Buffalo Trace if they had found a new batch of Stagg Jr., and Buffalo Trace confirmed it in that message. So that first day that it was released, it seemed to be only in the state of Maine, of all places. So I promptly snagged one through some backdoor whatevers and had one shipped here because I wanted to really get my hands on this, figure out what this new batch was like, and if it sort of follow the trend of recent releases. Now, Stagg Jr. Batch 12 is sort of like this famous batch. Everybody loved it. Sort of reminds you of the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof B520 batch, where, you know, people just say how balanced it is, how it drinks under its proof, how delicious it is, all of that stuff. Batch 13 was a great release of Stagg Jr. as well, in my opinion. Batch 14 universally seems that, you know, that one fell off. And so 15, I've been very curious to see if it continued declining, if it came back up, you know, what the story was going to be. Now, the proof, it's a very nice proof, 65.55% ABV. That's going to be 131.1 proof. It's the highest of the last couple releases, although Batch 12 is slightly higher than this. Now, I'm a big fan of Stagg Jr., even Batch 14, which people tend to have mixed reviews about. I'll drink that stuff any day. I think it's a great value, especially if you can find it at MSRP. If you're paying secondary prices for these, you know, I think it's pretty well worth it. I would love to pay around $100 at most, but if it's $130, $135, I don't have a problem shelling that out because these are barrel-proof versions of Buffalo Trace Mash Bill 1, which is my favorite mash bill from Buffalo Trace, besides some of the weeded stuff that they do. The way this is going to work today, I have in front of me, below the camera, you can't see this, I have 4 glasses poured out. I have the brand new batch 15, and then I have 14, 13, and 12, which are all of the batches that I own. I'm going to first taste through batch 15, and then I'm going to compare it to the other batches and see what kind of differences we get. Like I said, I've only had this for 2 days now, this bottle, so I've done my very best to pour enough out of here. You know, it's a rough problem to have to try to drink this bourbon, right? To pour enough out of here to get some air in the bottle, let it open up. These pours have been sitting out for like a half an hour at this point. I really wanted to get some air in them so that I could do the most fair comparison possible, given the time frame of getting this review out ASAP. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into Stagg Jr. Batch 15. All right, so right away on the nose, it's a heavy hitter. I think, to my memory, this is the hottest Stagg Jr. batch on the nose of these 4, back to batch 12. It's very hot on the nose, a little bit of ethanol. But you get those classic Buffalo Trace notes of, you know, honey, and in this case, because it's barrel proof, it's very dark honey. You get that brown sugar, you get that molasses, and some burnt caramels as well. You know, some batches tend to have a little bit of like cotton candy or bubblegum sweetness, or lots of grape. This batch, to me, doesn't have a lot of that. There might be a hint of grape in there, but that really overt sweetness that you get on some of these Stagg Jr. batches, I like to think that that grape note appears a lot in Buffalo Trace Mash Bill 1. I get it a lot in E.H. Taylor. You get the cherry and Eagle Rare. But this batch doesn't seem to have a lot of that candy sweetness. This seems to really rely on those sort of caramels and butterscotches and brown sugars, those types of flavors, those deeper, richer ones, as opposed to like the candy or the fruit. Now let's check it out on the palate. The first thing you get hit with is the proof. There's actually a little bit of like, I get a little bit of rye in there for whatever reason. Like a little bit of that young green rye with that ethanol cranked up. But there's actually like a nice burnt toast note to this. Really nice caramels. But it, for some reason, to me, it feels a bit thin. Like as aggressive as this is, as high proof as it is, it seems like it's a little bit unsubstantiated with its flavor. Now after that first sip, the nose definitely opens up. It definitely smells a good bit better. Let's try a second sip. Oh wow. So that second sip, I rinsed it around my mouth just a little bit more than the first. Got to be careful with these barrel proofers. I try to just take a sip first and not really coat my palate with it up front. That was a fundamentally different experience. Now it's really killer. Because this is such a high proof batch, it really dries out the palate very quickly. And I know that like all of the people out there that love high proof bourbons are going to love this batch. The other batches, at least if memory serves, correctly, did not hit as hard as this one does. It really does pull all of the moisture out of your mouth. But that time, there was some cherry on the palate. There was a ton of those rich honey notes, some really great brown sugar, molasses, butterscotch, all of that kind of stuff. And the finish is definitely still lingering. I'd say the finish, it's not really like cinnamon spice. It's more kind of just peppery and prickly. Let's have one more sip here. Yeah, and now on the nose, as my palate's gotten acclimated, I'm getting a good bit of oak. A good bit of like, it's very balanced oak. Sort of like vanilla and oak together. It's not too sweet, not too drying. I really like it. Third sip is the most balanced sip. There's the grape. There's that burnt caramel. Wow, the grape is really mouthwatering. Of course, those nice brown sugar notes. And now, as we're getting into the finish, well, we gotta wait on the finish. I mean, geez, it's still going on the palate. Okay, now we're getting into the finish. Yeah, maybe a little bit of prickly pepper, not as much as I first thought. It's really just good oak, some slight sweet grape, burnt caramel. That's very nice. I actually finished my glass here, so I'm gonna have to re-pour this thing so that I can compare it down the line to these other batches here. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and let's go first to batch 12. Let's check this out. Because it is such a highly regarded batch, I think a direct comparison 15 to 12 is going to be nice. Yeah, so batch 12 is much softer on the nose. It's way more balanced. Like, you don't have any rough edges to this. And I think that's why people love this batch so much, is that you get a full presentation of a lot of those brown aromas. We're talking about like the burnt caramels, the toffees, the butterscotches, the brown sugars. You get a lot of those sweet aromas. Nothing stands out more than the other, but you also have a nice bit of fruit in there to support all of it. Check this out on the palate. Yeah, got a little bit of the eyes watering here, the high proof. So what makes this batch stand out to me as compared to batch 15 is the lack of ethanol. The lack of anything that suggests youth, that suggests unsupported flavor. 12 to me is still a superior batch, But like I said, if you enjoy high proof bourbons, you're going to like this batch 15. It is slightly more rough around the edges, but all of the Stagg Jr. characteristics are still intact and they're still there. So that was batch 12. Go back to batch 15 for a second. Oh yeah, and when you go back to batch 15, you smell the youth. You smell actually, it's not, I don't want to say peanut because people are going to think I'm crazy saying something from Buffalo Trace has a peanut note in there. There is a slight nuttiness though, a slight brittle nuttiness to batch 15, especially when you compare it here to batch 12, because it's a little bit richer, a little bit more balanced all the way around. So I'm going to go back to batch 15 now. Still very good, just not quite as rounded out as batch 12, I would say. I'm going to have a little sip of water here before we get to batch 13 now. Okay, so as batch 15 fades out of my palate here, I'm moving to batch 13 now. This was my first Stagg Jr. I ever owned before I backtracked and bought 12, then 14, and now 15. And I mean, heck, I thought 13 was a great introduction to Stagg Jr. I think it's a great middle-of-the-road batch that's still affordable on secondary. It's not getting gouged like batch 12 is. So I really think 13 is all around just a really great batch. So let's see what we get here. Yeah, kind of the same thing. You don't get the youthful notes of the new batch 15. It does feel a little bit darker and more well-rounded. Now, in this batch, I get more sweetness. I get a lot of grape sweetness in this batch, 13. Grape, maybe a little bit of dark cherry. I'm going to go for one more sip of this one, just because I sipped water before this. There's like that cotton candy or bubblegum sweetness that people talk about. That is really apparent in batch 13 for me. All of the other characteristics are still in line. I get a good bit of like toastiness, you know, toasted bread type of thing. I get like that toasted bread or maybe burnt caramel. I do get that in batch 13 quite a bit, but it is most substantially candied, fruity type notes. Whereas batch 12, I think, really just balances all of those things, and batch 15 seems to rely a lot on the brown sugars, the honey, molasses, all of that, with that youthfulness and that slight rye, green ethanol kick in there. Okay, we have one more batch to compare to, which is batch 14, and this was sort of thought of as the weakest batch in recent memory. The secondary prices have stayed low on this batch because, you know, it didn't really compare to batch 12 and maybe even batch 13 for that matter. So I'm going to do one more sip of water here before we get into it, because I am blowing my palate out with all of these barrel-proof Stagg Juniors. All right, so now as batch 13 fades away from my palate, let's do a comparison between 15 and 14. I'm going to start with 14 here. There's some really nice, like, cane sugar and honey that jumps off the top of batch 14 for me. Of course, like a little bit of that oak, a little bit of that vanilla. Yeah, vanilla. I can't get that out of my head now. Vanilla is really strong on this batch. But for some reason, batch 14 to me lacks depth. It almost feels like it's a little bit closed off. Like, I don't know if water would open it up or not. Maybe I could test that at some point here. But it just seems like it's constricted and like it needs to just open up and relax. This has been sitting out, like I said, at least 30 minutes, maybe even 45 minutes before this video. And while I am getting that vanilla, that oak, and some really nice, you know, sweet honeys and sweet cane sugar type things, I'm not getting the really rich butterscotch or brown sugars that the other batches have. But that's not to say that this isn't a great batch. I mean, it's still a Stagg Jr. It's still great, and I'm going to sip this any day of the week. Batch 14 on the palate. There's some cherry in there. Like, there's definitely a fruity middle to that palate. There is something a little bit more sharp. Again, it's not nutty, it's not peanut, but like a very sort of sharp caramel in there, if that makes any sense. Some nice honeys. One more on the palate here. There's the Buffalo Trace signature honey. It lacks something. Batch 14 just lacks something. I don't know. I can't put my finger on what it is. It might be depth, you know, having a really nice oak or butterscotch undertone. Maybe that's what it's lacking. When you compare it to these other batches, it becomes sort of clear. If you have it by itself, you're totally okay with it. I do get, like, starting in batch 14 here, I'm starting to really get that Buffalo Trace cardboard note that people talk about. Some people say wet cardboard. Some people say it just has a cardboard note. There's something about it that has that cardboard thing going on, especially in batch 14. And that really is reminiscent of a lot of the other Buffalo Trace products. For me, I get that a lot on the sort of flagship Buffalo Trace, you know, bourbon. I get that cardboard note there, and on a couple of other offerings as well. This is reminiscent of that. It really tastes like you took Buffalo Trace with all the honey and the sweet sugar notes and all that, and you cranked it to 11. That's what Stagg 14 is for me. The others seem slightly more advanced, better barrels, better batches, etc. 14 just seems like you took Buffalo Trace and amped it up. All right, let me go back to batch 15 now, and we're gonna close the video out. Yeah, I can't get this out of my head that there's something nutty about batch 15 as compared to these other batches. You might not recognize it if you sip 15 by itself, but for whatever reason, it's there. It's just bright. It's just a brighter batch. It's, you know, more youthful maybe. But it does still have, of course, those signature Stagg Jr. notes. But I'm, at this point, really not getting a lot of fruit on the nose. And I don't think I was earlier either. I've got to say, where batch 15 shines is on the palate. The nose seems odd. You know, I remember when I first cracked it and I smelled it and I was like, oh my God. It smelled like a hazmat bottle. It smelled 70% plus alcohol. Maybe it was just the day that I opened it, having not had anything to drink, but it took me by surprise. And now, I mean, it still retains a lot of that proof, like just hitting you in the face. But there's something about the nose that I don't like. Now with the palate, you start to get into those signature Stagg Jr. flavors. And what I like about the palate is that it's so aggressive and so alcohol forward and so drying that it's just like an intense experience. And if you like that kind of experience, you should absolutely buy this Stagg Jr. This thing, if you wanted to put it over ice, if you're the kind of person that likes to drink your bourbon over ice, this would be an incredible candidate for that. It would hold up for quite a long time over ice. It drinks much above its proof. But I can't help but, you know, notice the strong cardboard note now, especially now that it's sat out for a while on the nose, the youthfulness, all of that. It's a good batch. It's not my favorite. If I had to rank these batches, I would probably say 12 takes the cake. Well, shoot, I'm going to go reverse chronological. 12, 13, 14, and then 15. But with the caveat that batch 15, for those of you who enjoy really intense bourbon, really high proof experiences, you're probably going to prefer batch 15, maybe over all of these except batch 12, if you really want to go after that aggressive experience. Otherwise, I would put these in the order of 12, 13, 14, 15. Again, understanding if you wanted to move 15 slightly higher because you want that, you know, really intense thing, you might put it over 14 and maybe even 13. All right, so that's all for this video. This was a rough video to make. Oh my God, 4 amazing barrel strength bourbons here. I'm pretty much tapped out for the night, I would say. But I'm gonna get this out as soon as I possibly can. I'm gonna get this thing edited and released. I wanted to be the first one to have a batch 15 review. We'll see if that holds true by the time this comes out. If you haven't already, please, please, please like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, find me on Facebook, give me a like there. And if you have any suggestions for anything you'd like to see me review, send me an email, drop me a comment, any of those things. Otherwise, I will see you next time on Drums and Drams. Gonna have my final sip of batch 12 here. Cheers, everybody.